Thank you for tuning in to Sound and Fury book reviews. I'm on a ball this month for my wrap-up video, I think. And if you stick around to the end, you'll get to see a video of one of my mutts. If you hear some weird grunting noises, it sounds like a weird goat in the background. That's actually my baby. She has the hiccups and doesn't like it, so I might have to edit out some of her noises if they're too loud. But yeah, she just won't calm down. Anyway, I feel weird lately not holding up all the books I've read because I've been reading a lot of NetGalley books on my tablet. So I'm going to wave my tablet around because I feel weird not holding a book. It's a Kindle Fire and I like it because all the books I buy for $1 just automatically get uploaded to it and I never read them, but that's okay. Amazon, you can feel free to pay me for this endorsement and give me a spot on Jeff Bezos' future Amazon planet, I guess. Speaking of planets, so the first book that I read was Annihilation, Aria by Michael R. Underwood. So I received this as a free ARC from NetGalley in exchange for a fair review. I read it on my Kindle Fire. The cover, as you can see, the cover is gorgeous. It's a beautiful cover. It's pretty much what drew me to it. And I mean, everyone looks at covers, but I'm not usually like a cover person. I'm more like a title person. I'm like, ooh, that's an interesting title. But this cover is really pretty. It's a light space opera, basically. And as much as I love the genre itself, I was a little underwhelmed with this novel. It's frustrating that I couldn't like it more because it has a lot of the things that I love. You know, female characters who are people and not just tag-along girlfriends. You know, cool weapons, respectful romantic relationships, and alien cultures. Unfortunately, nothing about it was particularly innovative or even exciting. I think the main issue is that this book feels like a book two. Instead of getting to watch a team grow and come together despite their differences, Max, Lara, and Wheel are already a functioning trio. Their dynamic is therefore a little boring. You know, the reason why Guardians of the Galaxy, for example, which the author mentions in there afterward, is so much fun is because the team doesn't get along at the start. They don't even get along, you know, after they're together as a team. And it's also another reason why I liked, you know, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and Firefly and pretty much every other sci-fi book movie about a small group on a spaceship. And, you know, that's why I'm writing one myself. Ooh, I snuck that in there. If the dialogue had been snappy and fun, it might have been okay. But there's nothing really memorable about their banter, aside from the one time when Max references Fresh Prince, which was actually really good. I guess what's even more frustrating is that this could have been a really good fish out of water story, given Max's origin, or it could have been an unorthodox romance story, but it barely qualifies because she's already human. And we're denied both of these because Max is already acclimatized and the romance is already built. It just seems like Max's Terran background is included only for three reasons. You know, to make cultural comparisons regarding discrimination, to provide allusions to Earth popular culture, and to make it easy to identify with him. Yet these things worked, but I didn't find they were necessary. Like, it didn't seem like they really added much to the story. I mean, the culture references were good, but it didn't need that. And I appreciated the respectful relationship between Max and Lara, but we're often told rather than shown their dynamic. I know at one point Lara mentions how Max makes her laugh, but I don't think we're ever given a scene where this happens. And yeah, Wheel calls them lovebirds, but other than regular affectionate things that people do when they're in relationships, I wouldn't consider them over the top. The story does pick up really considerably around the 40% mark because we get a new perspective, and that's that of the antagonist. And that gave the story a much needed kind of depth and interest, as this character has a different perspective on the whole thing. And, you know, his chapters provide some really interesting background on the villains. I really liked the villains. I thought they were a really interesting concept, and they pretty much saved the novel for me. But then at the end, the novel goes full save the world from a doomsday device thing. And I kind of finished it just to finish it because there was a huge continuity, or error at least I thought there was. And, you know, I've seen the doomsday weapons plot many times. I'm still giving it a 3 out of 5 because it had a great deal of potential and I did love certain things about it, but I didn't like things enough to, you know, bump it to a 4. I recommend it to people who haven't read a lot of the genre, so maybe teenagers. It's a good way to get into it, but it's not a hardcore sci-fi enough for like dorcases like me. And I did think the title was rather clever given Lara's powers and the doomsday weapon, so cool title. Okay, so the second book I read was The City We Became. This is an urban fantasy by powerhouse author N.K. Jemisin. So I had pre-ordered this book from the library in the new year, and then when COVID struck, it was trapped in the library until they finally started giving us our holds. So yay! I don't have it to show you because I had to give it back to the library. But I absolutely love the Broken Earth trilogy by Jemisin, so I was really looking forward to this one. Let me preface by saying I'm not a city person. I do enjoy, the opportunities for the new food in cities, and, you always see something interesting, like usually people doing crazy stuff. But I'm more into like scenic vistas, or more so like abandoned places where there's no people, than cities. So, I've been to Arizona more times than New York City. I love the desert. Anyway, I've been in New York City twice, and I did enjoy it, though I'd have to say Dublin is probably my favorite city. I haven't been in New York City enough, though, to understand any of the differences between the boroughs. I never really felt lost while reading. Jemisin did a fantastic job explaining their differing vibes and cultures. So if you are, wanting to read this book, but you're like, oh, is it going to be kind of like an insular thing just for people that live in New York? No, you can totally understand it without it. And I mean, she's an amazing writer. She makes you wholly incapable of putting down her books once you start them. She has this narrative voice that just sucks you in, but there's also this deep intelligence and strategy behind her words. Like, she is an amazing writer. That being said, I didn't love the book. While the characters were interesting and fun, and I love the badass grandma character, the story is more about them dealing with the Lovecraftian evil monster from another dimension rather than their own kind of story arcs. I felt very comic book movie at times, where the bulk of the story is focused on each character discovering their burrow and their power and then bringing them all together for this final showdown. I often enjoy books that don't have a central protagonist, but I often felt like I knew where this story was going and nothing really surprised me about it. Compared to how immersive and unique Broken Earth was, this was somewhat of a letdown, and that might have been why, because the Broken Earth trilogy is just so fantastic. I also might have enjoyed it a bit more if it had stuck to being kind of an intelligent romp than an attempt to be kind of poignant. There were so many references to societal issues of today that the novel, can't really be anything but serious. And then that means that the fantastical kind of magical realism aspects of the novel felt a little simplistic and the plot was a little basic. I loved the concept, though, of the cities being anthropomorphized and the mythos behind those that didn't make the transition. That whole thing was awesome. I would have enjoyed it far more if there had been more of a balance or towards one side between social commentary and world building. It just felt a little like the social stuff felt a little heavy-handed, though it definitely packs a punch. Like, I'm not saying it's not important and you don't need it. I'm just saying that in this particular book, it kind of took away from the story. It felt more like she was trying to make an argument than to give us an interesting story. I'm still giving it 4 out of 5, though, because, I definitely enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend it to pretty much anyone. But, it didn't blow me away like her other works. Also, cities suck. I hate cities. Give me the sky and the sea and the mountains, Give me all those places where people aren't. Okay. The third book I read was Bronte's Mistress by Finola Austin. The cover's really it's kind of cool. I like it. I think it's nice. It very much suits the genre. I think they did a good job. So this is a historical fiction. So, Charlotte Bronte, author of Jane Eyre. Her entire family, if you didn't know, were artists and writers. So we got Anne Bronte, Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights. I've read pretty much all of their works. And they also had a brother named Branwell. So he was a drunk. And there was a rumor that he had an affair with an older woman who was his tutor when he was a tutor. So this is this big, old, unproven scandal in the literary world. The book invents some letters that have been found between the two and, posits what would have happened if in the supposed affair. It's actually a lot of fun. So it's a very engrossing and sympathetic portrayal of a woman wishing for more in a time period that denies her almost any choice to do so. It's an engaging, modernized but non-anachronistic first person, leaving out all the extraneous details often included in novels of the actual time period, like copious descriptions of landscapes. As such, it doesn't have the languid pace of novels from the 1800s, but it makes, so it kind of feels a little bit quick at times. But, I didn't want a 500-page, drawn-out, faux, Victorian novel. This was actually much more palatable. It's very well-researched what-if about Branwell Bronte, and, you can tell that the author put a lot of effort into getting the little details correct, and which I appreciated, because I studied Victorian domestic fiction in university, and so I can tell when people don't actually know what they're talking about, or they've watched one Pride and Prejudice remake and they're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna write a book about this. Yeah, please research. Anyway, So, about the book itself, Lydia Robinson is the name of the woman that Bran will supposedly had an affair with. It's told from her perspective, as I said. While I don't share her libido, I was very sympathetic to her desire for passion in her life. You know, even if the loveless marriage which she had wasn't an issue, it's easy to see how she was stifled in many other ways societally, such as music, social interactions, and, you know, she's very bored, unfulfilled, and in need of attention. So the novel, because it's in her perspective, positions her, you know, desires and actions as permissible. I tend to agree, you know, like, her husband hasn't given her a lot to work on. Like, in terms of the affair, I'm fine with that, whatever, that kind of made sense. There is a lot to dislike about Lydia, especially when it pertains to her children, but that's what makes her so interesting and so compelling. She's not a likable heroine, but you feel for her as much as you kind of dislike her. What I thought was really interesting about the novel is that passages kind of pop up throughout that provide a feminist critique of the time period, and they're far more overt than you would find in novels of the actual era. Probably because male publishers would remove the sentiments rather than, you know, they weren't actually felt. You know, there's a really good line where she says, for example, give up your body for years to birth them, stand quiet when they reject, deceive, abuse you, and if you're a mother, you will be called selfish, probably by the very man who gave your children nothing but his name. Yeah, like that was super common back then. Probably still common now in some places. What's the most interesting about this novel is how the plot is not just the story of the affair. I kind of expected that to be like the whole thing. It would be like this big climax and it's all romantic and stuff. But it actually is super realistic, and the love story part of it, or the affair, is actually a small part of the story. It's more about Lydia Robinson's life and less about Branwell, which I kind of like because I'm like, we know a lot about dudes back then. It's interesting to see more from a female perspective. You know, I didn't love the novel, but as a fan of the Bronte sisters' writing in the time period, you know, it was an interesting extrapolation into a common speculation in the genre, and, you know, it was an engaging, quick-paced story that shows the constraints and expectations placed on women in a certain class of the 1800s. You know, it's very white, it's very elitist in its focus, but, you know, such was the time period, such was, you know, where this is set, obviously. There was a little bit of LGBTQ stuff included, which felt really natural, and I really enjoyed, because that's definitely one aspect of the 1800s that we don't get in the novels unless it's very, very subtle. So I really liked that was included. I thought that was really nice. Yeah, so I give it a 4 to 5 stars. I recommend it to anyone who loves historical fiction, and especially those who are fans of the Brontes. Okay, so the 4th book I read was really interesting. It's called We of the Forsaken World by Kiran Bhat, or Bhat, I'm not sure how you say his last name. I call it a general fiction. It's probably a literary fiction, though. The cover's really cool. Like, for like an indie publisher or like a small publisher, it's got a really neat concept. You can kind of tell, like, you know, the cover's quite good, actually. So I was gifted a copy of this by the author in exchange for a fair review. He got in touch with me via Goodreads, which is a process I'm totally fine with, and I read it on my Kindle again. So, how do I describe what happens in this novel? It's interconnected stories, but not in the way that short stories sometimes are related. You know, it's indeed a novel, but each character only has one chapter devoted to them, but they do reappear in the story later, often multiple times. So the novel follows these people in 4 areas of an undisclosed area of the world. There's a tribal village, there's a town struck by an industrial disaster, there's a rural village, and a city. I believe it's left kind of intentionally vague where the novel is set, and it's a little jarring at first because you do spend some time being like, is this in Europe? Is this in the East? Like, where is this? But in fact, it works, you know, and the entire novel is actually quite jarring, but once you get into it and see what the author is trying to do, and I think he succeeds in doing it, you begin to appreciate the layers and complexity that the stories that he's telling. Because, yeah, it's not really a plot. I can't really tell you what it's about because anyway. This is one of those novels that kind of sticks in your head after you're finished. Like, little scenes come to your mind later more than when you're reading it. It kind of feels like a gimmick at the start because the chapters like bleed into each other. No one has a name, blah, blah, blah. But this gimmick is kind of quickly disproven because it has these deeply affecting themes and it's very universal. So he writes in this concise yet lyrical manner that uses situations and inner monologue to convey action. You know, most of what happens in the novel is how people are reacting to a situation after the fact or ruminating on what they should do. So there's rarely a time when something actually is happening. It's more of reactionary story, and some of their reactions are based on the changing world around them, such as emerging technology and globalization. Sexuality is another theme in it, particularly in conservative patriarchal settings. It's a theme that pervades, and I thought it was executed quite well in showing, how contrived yet constrictive our systems actually are. I was particularly impressed with the female characters and how they were written. Most of their arcs revolve around men, but they had a lot of depth to them, at least. It's not the happiest of novels, but given the title, I was expecting a rather melancholy read. One note, I did not read the introduction or the preface or whatever it was. As a hard rule, I do not read introductions because they often contain spoilers, and that makes me mad. If I'm going to do like a new historicist reading of the book after I read it or something, then I'll go back and read the intro. But, I like going into a text having absolutely no preconceived notions about it. Hence is why I sometimes forget to give you guys like a plot overview of these books before I review them. I did read there was like a 3 or 4 page explanation with a bunch of maps. I did read that because I was like, oh, that's probably something I should know. Anyway, this is an immersive, ambitious read. I give it 4 to 5 stars. I have a good track record this month. And I recommend it to people who aren't afraid of something a little weird, dark, and plays with the formatting. And thank you so much to the author for providing me an opportunity to read it for free. That was very nice. I managed to squeeze this last one in somehow, but it was an easy read and it wasn't hard to do. So it was The Phlebotomist by Chris Panatier. I'm not sure, sorry. Apparently I can't talk properly. There's like some words that I say that are weird. Apparently I say hash browns weird and solitaire and mascara weird. I don't know, I can't tell, but my friends make fun of me all the time. So what am I talking about? Oh yeah, The Phlebotomist, whatever. It's a sci-fi action adventure thriller. I received it from NetGalley in exchange for a fair review. I read it on my Kindle Fire. Big surprise. So what is this book about? So you've got Willa, who's this old lady, and she is a blood technician, and you have people every day have to go to her blood clinic and donate blood because it's set in the future and there's been a bunch of nuclear attacks and they're in a safe zone and they have to give their blood to the people in the gray zones, they call it, to help them because they're dying. As a result, a caste system has been built based on your blood type, based on the rarity of and ability to transfuse said blood. Willa works her job to support her grandson because her granddaughter died, or her daughter died, I can't remember how. But anyway, she ends up running into someone that causes her life to spiral into this completely weird conspiracy direction that pairs her with this fast-talking hacker lady and some other people in the criminal underworld that want to kind of even society's odds. They discover something they never expected, and then that's when you can cue the ominous music. This is all the first, 30 pages. I definitely enjoyed reading this novel. It didn't blow me away, though. While there are many variations of classism, segregation in sci-fi novels, this was a new one. Segregating people by blood type is a fascinating premise, and I think it worked the way that he's had it set up in the book. I don't know anything about blood types, clearly. I don't even know my own blood type. I have 2 kids, I have no idea what their blood type is. I should probably know that, but anyway, the logistics of the harvest, as they call it, was fairly believable, as is the eventual reason we find out for what's going on. I'm not going to talk about it because it's a twist, and I wasn't super keen on the twist. I thought it was kind of dumb. But the story itself is an exciting, entertaining thriller. Some people might love it, and that's cool. It really shines with the 2 characters. So Willa, she's rather naive and complacent grandmother, and then you have Locke, who's an ex-Marine with a big gun, and she's a hacker, and she's kind of fun because she's super rash, and Willa is very kind of restrained, so they really play off each other quite well. And it's really neat in this genre to have, our 2 main characters be 2 old ladies. It's awesome. You never see that. Neither of them kind of grow as people, but they're quite fun to watch and read about. There's another character, Everard, who gets a perspective, but it's only for a few chapters, and I think it's really only included because then we have an eye on what happens to him later. I found that a little bit contrived, his perspective. I wish we'd gotten more of it because he has an interesting backstory. We don't learn anything about him, though, so I was like, really? He's included just for this reason? So, whatever. I mean, his story was fun. The other thing that kind of I was like, about it was that there's this tonal shift from the first and the second half that takes this story from kind of a serious sci-fi to kind of more campy. It was still a fun story and I enjoyed reading it, but I really liked this kind of subtly menacing tone of the first half more than the action-adventure narrative of the second half. It felt like the novel was trying to say something in the first half. I mean, probably about classism, But that kind of dissolves and becomes simply an adventure in the second part. So I was kind of like, where did the kind of interesting part go? Anyway, it's a fun ride with a pair of protagonists that we're not used to seeing. It's a novel that morphs from one genre to another about 5 or 6 times. And there was a twist that I did not expect. I don't know how I missed this, but anyway, if you have read this and you knew and you figured out the twist right away, you feel free to make fun of me. I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5. I recommend it to people who like dystopian novels with an action twist to it. I think people that are in like the sciences, like blood technicians or whatever, might like it because they might like the sciencey aspects of it. There's a lot of kind of hard science in it that I was kind of like, I don't know anything about this. So yeah, thanks for checking out my wrap up and watching me hold my baby. If you've read any of these novels, give me a shout in the comments with your thoughts. As usual, add me on Goodreads. If you have a self-published book, you can send it to me to review as long as it fits my stipulations listed on my website. And then, as promised, here is a clip of one of my dogs. I haven't decided yet which clip, so it could be Denny, it could be Ruger. Prepare for a twist, I guess.